don't eat from unlicensed street carts. I did, and I swallowed the missing girls of Lower Manhattan. Chinatown Night Market Alley, 2:30 a.m. I still throw up violently every time I smell meat roasting on an open charcoal grill. This was real. Lower East Side, just off East Broadway, late last year. When I opened that heavy, duct-taped styrofoam cooler, I saw exactly why the meat was so unbelievably cheap. I know how this sounds. I never said this out loud because the sheer disgust and the profound sense of violation make my throat close up just thinking about it. You think you know the people in your neighborhood? You think the friendly older man serving you hot food on a freezing night is just a hardworking immigrant trying to survive the crushing reality of New York City. You never expect to find out that you've been casually consuming the butchered flesh of your own neighbors. You never expect to realize that you are an active participant in hiding the evidence of a serial killer. I was working the night shift at a massive 24-hour printing press down in Soho. My routine was always the exact same exhausting loop. I would finish my shift around 2 a.m., my hands stained with industrial ink, and walk through the damp, rat-infested alleys towards the East Broadway subway station. I would always wait there for my roommate, Mark, who worked as a bartender a few blocks away. We would meet up, grab some cheap, greasy food to kill the hunger, and take the F train back to our tiny apartment in Queens. That's exactly how I met Arthur. Arthur ran a small, battered metal food cart tucked away in a narrow, poorly lit alley just on the edge of the Chinatown night market. It wasn't one of the bright, touristy spots with long lines and neon signs. It was a grimy, hidden corner, illuminated only by a single, flickering, sickly green fluorescent bulb buzzing overhead. But the smell, God, the smell was absolutely intoxicating. It was a rich, sweet, incredibly heavy aroma of roasting meat caramelizing over glowing hot coals. It cut right through the usual New York stench of rotting garbage, wet cardboard, and stale urine. One freezing Tuesday night, Mark was running late. I was freezing, my stomach growling violently. I walked up to Arthur's cart to see what he had. He was a small, unassuming man, maybe in his late 60s, with deep, weathered wrinkles and a warm, grandfatherly smile that instantly made you trust him. He was wearing a thick, heavy, rubberized butcher's apron. I noticed it was permanently stained with dark, overlapping blotches of brown and black grease. "Special skewers tonight, my friend," Arthur said, his voice raspy and kind. "Very tender. Secret family recipe, only $2 for you." $2 for a massive skewer of meat in Manhattan is mathematically impossible. You can't even buy a bottle of water for that price anymore. But I was starving, the cold was biting through my jacket, and the meat smelled absolutely divine. I bought 3 of them without thinking twice. I took my first bite right there in the alley. It was incredible. The meat was surprisingly sweet, incredibly tender, and it practically melted in my mouth. It didn't taste like pork, beef, or chicken. It had a rich, almost gamey flavor, but the heavy, dark spices completely masked any weirdness. When Mark finally showed up, I bought him a few skewers too. We devoured them on the train ride home. We quickly became regulars. Almost every single night, we stopped by Arthur's cart. We joked with him. He told us he got special offcuts from a supplier who owed him favors. We didn't ask any further questions. Why would we? It was cheap, it was delicious, and it saved us money. But slowly, the small, deeply unsettling details started to pile up in my subconscious. First, it was the bizarre texture of the meat. Sometimes, it was almost too soft, lacking the usual fibrous resistance of animal muscle. Sometimes, the thick chunks of fat layered between the meat pieces had a strange, sickly yellowish hue. Once, I found a dense clump of coarse, dark hair stuck to the bottom of the wooden skewer. When I pointed it out, Arthur just laughed it off, saying a stray alley cat must have brushed past his outdoor prep table. I believed him because I desperately wanted to. I didn't want to lose my cheap late-night meal. Then there was the incident with the street drain. About a month into our routine, I noticed the heavy iron storm drain near Arthur's cart was completely clogged. But it wasn't clogged with autumn leaves or normal street trash. A thick, gelatinous, reddish-black sludge was bubbling up from the grate, pooling onto the asphalt. It smelled strongly of raw copper, industrial bleach, and something profoundly biologically rotten. A stench so dense and foul it physically stuck to the back of my throat, making me gag. I casually asked Arthur about it. His grandfatherly smile dropped for a fraction of a second. His eyes went completely dead, empty, black, and incredibly cold. "Old city pipes," he muttered quickly, grabbing a heavy plastic bucket of chlorinated water and throwing it violently over the grate. The aggressive sizzle of the harsh chemicals hitting the biological waste sent a cloud of burning, foul-smelling vapor into the freezing night air. The real, undeniable nightmare began the night it rained heavily. Mark had called in sick, so I was alone. I bought my usual skewers from Arthur, hiding under his small umbrella. As I was handing him a crumpled $5 bill, an old, heavily rusted white van pulled up to the curb. Arthur suddenly looked extremely stressed and paranoid. He asked if I could do him a massive favor and help him carry a large cooler down to his prep basement, just half a block away. I agreed immediately. He was an old man, and I thought I was just doing a good deed for a friendly neighbor. We carried the massive, heavily duct-taped styrofoam cooler down a steep, cracked concrete stairwell into a subterranean basement. The air down there was instantly suffocating. It was a humid, sticky heat that smelled overwhelmingly of ammonia, rusted iron, and spoiled meat. The basement was an absolute horror show. The damp brick walls were completely covered in thick, transparent plastic sheeting, which was splattered with dried, rusty arcs of dark blood. In the absolute center of the room was a heavy wooden butcher's block, deeply scarred and gouged by heavy cleavers. To the side, bolted to a metal table, was a massive industrial meat grinder, the exact kind they use in commercial slaughterhouses. Its wide metal funnel was coated in a fresh, glistening layer of slick, red grease. I felt a freezing cold sweat break out over my entire body. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was just an illegal slaughterhouse. People processed stolen pigs or stray dogs here. It was disgusting, highly illegal, but not completely unthinkable for the dark underbelly of the city. As we forcefully set the heavy cooler down on the wet concrete floor, the layers of duct tape snapped under the pressure. The styrofoam lid shifted open just a few inches. Inside, packed tightly in bloody, melting ice, were large, pale slabs of meat, but they weren't shaped like any animal cuts I had ever seen. Through the narrow gap, I saw what looked unmistakably like a human shoulder, the delicate collarbone cleanly severed by a mechanical saw. Right next to it was a patch of pale skin bearing a distinct, colorful butterfly tattoo. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, sounding like a drum in my ears. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. I violently suppressed the urge to scream. I pretended I didn't see anything. I forced a fake smile, my facial muscles trembling uncontrollably, told Arthur I had to catch my train right now, and practically ran up the dark stairs, gasping for fresh air. I didn't call the police immediately. I was in a state of profound, paralyzing denial. I desperately convinced myself my exhausted, sleep-deprived brain had hallucinated the shapes in the dark. I went home, triple-locked the door, and scrubbed my hands with scalding hot water and dish soap until the skin literally bled, trying to wash away the phantom smell of his basement. 3 agonizing days later, the brutal truth completely shattered my denial. I was watching the local morning news in my apartment, staring blankly at the screen. The anchor suddenly announced a gruesome, historic discovery in a Lower East Side basement. Neighbors had finally complained to the city about an unbearable, rotting stench and severely clogged plumbing backing up into their sinks. When the NYPD raided the underground location, they found a literal house of horrors. They found the fully dismembered, partially processed remains of at least 7 different women. Runaways, local sex workers, undocumented immigrants, people no one immediately missed. The police had arrested the owner of a local street cart. The live footage showed Arthur, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back, being aggressively pushed into the back of an unmarked squad car. He was still wearing that exact same stained rubber apron. As he was shoved down, he looked directly into the news camera, and he smiled that exact same warm, grandfatherly smile. The reporter's next words turned my blood to absolute ice. Authorities strongly suspect the perpetrator may have disposed of the victim's remains by processing the human meat, heavily spicing it, and selling it as cheap street food to unsuspecting late-night customers in the Chinatown area. I instantly sprinted to my tiny bathroom and vomited so violently I thought my ribs would crack. I emptied my stomach until there was nothing left but stinging bile. I dry heaved over the toilet bowl until my throat literally tore and I spat bright red blood into the porcelain sink. I crawled on my hands and knees to the kitchen trash can where I had thrown away the leftover skewers from my last purchase. I frantically ripped the plastic garbage bag open, tearing my nails. I pulled out the half-eaten skewer, covered in cold grease. I picked the meat apart with violently shaking fingers under the bright kitchen light. Buried deep inside a thick chunk of cooked, heavily spiced muscle, I found something hard. It wasn't a bone. It wasn't a piece of gristle. It was a small, silver belly button piercing, shaped like a tiny skull. The exact same piercing I had seen on a young homeless girl who used to sleep near my subway entrance. A girl I used to give my spare change to. A girl I hadn't seen in over 3 weeks. I had eaten her. I had literally chewed, swallowed, and digested another human being simply because it was cheap, convenient, and tasted good. For 6 straight months, I couldn't eat solid food. I survived entirely on liquid nutritional shakes and bottled water. I lost almost 40 pounds. I had to be admitted to an intensive psychiatric program just to be able to walk down a New York street without having a severe panic attack. Every single time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim. I felt like a monster. I felt completely infected. Like their DNA, their suffering, their butchered flesh was now permanently integrated into my own body. The police eventually contacted me because they found my face on a nearby security camera as a regular customer. I had to go to the precinct and give a sworn statement. The lead detective looked at me across the metal table with a mixture of deep pity and profound, unavoidable disgust. He told me I was incredibly lucky. Arthur had a very specific type for his actual victims. He targeted vulnerable, isolated women. I was just a blind, hungry customer. I was nothing more than a walking, breathing garbage disposal for his horrific evidence. Arthur is currently locked up in Rikers, awaiting a massive federal trial. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but the prosecution is pushing for consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The sensational media dubbed him the Midnight Butcher. But to me, he will always be the kind old man who smiled at me warmly while happily feeding me the slaughtered, grilled remains of the city's forgotten souls. I still live in New York City, but my life is unrecognizable. I never, ever eat out anymore. My fridge is full of sealed, branded, strictly vegetarian packages from reputable supermarkets. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the narrow, damp alleys of the Lower East Side, I swear to God I can still smell it. That distinct, sweet, heavy, intoxicating aroma of roasting meat. and my stomach violently twists into knots, knowing that somewhere out there, in this massive, indifferent city, another monster is probably smiling behind a hot grill, just waiting for the next hungry, unsuspecting customer to take a bite.